Okay, good morning. We're up to Siman Reish Beis, Siv Zayin. What we're going to discuss today is very interesting because it will have bearing on lots of very practical halachas. For example, what bracha do you make on potato kigel? What bracha do you make on Latkes? On these sort of things, when you take a fruit or a vegetable and you crush them, do they retain their original status, whatever it may be, or do they become shahakol? So that's really what this sif is about. So it's actually a very, very relevant sif. Says the Machaba, Tamarim, dates, shemiachon biyad, you press them with your hand, for also mehem is, and you make some sort of dough out of them, you make a mush, for hoitzi mehem garinehem, and you take out the seeds, the pips, afilu hachilo nishtana birchason. That nevertheless the bracha does not change. And you would still make a beri praetz on this sort of squashed date mixture. And you would make a mein shalosh, which means an ala peris, at the end when you finished. In other words, it's still considered like a proper date. Says the Ramah, Lefizeh, hu adin be'latveren hanikra pavdilo. If you look at number 1 at the bottom, Rabbi is talking about some sort of jam. You've got you make some sort of jam. You've got the fruit, and you squash them, and you add sugar and whatever, but you can still see the fruit. Says the Ramah, you make a ber proetz. There are those who say you make a shahakol. And therefore, it's better to be chayshish and to actually make a shahakol. But if you're yotze, if you make a berayitz, then you are yotze. Okay, kein nira ikka. Says the Mishnah Berurah, shemachon. Right, this is sifkot and men. Biyad va'asa. So you press them with your hands and you make date pulp or something. Pirush afshin israsik halidei zel legamrei afilu hachin mevarchin prioitz. Even though you take a date and you squash it, you make a ber praetz. Mishum dekiven da'adayin mamoshen Chaim, since the actual original part of the date is still there. Shaykh levarech aleim ber praetz. You say ber praetz. You still make a ber praetz. V'adin le'inyan priadoma kagoyin erd apple shemachan va'osen ki'isa. He says erd apple. He says number 6. Yeah, tapuch adamo is potatoes. You make mashed potatoes or something like that. So long as it's that you can see that it comes from a potato, and therefore you would still make a ber priadomo. Okay, let's just finish the Mishnah Berurah on this, and then we'll go back to discuss the various things I mentioned earlier. So mem aleph hanikra parvdila. This is the jam. Sha'osin gudgoniyos or shar minim. You make it from cherries, berries, or something like that. Shemoitzin garineim. You take out the pips. Umavashin or something. You cook them. Achem nimoichel legamrei. Yesh oim levarech shahakol, but then nechel koachronim. This is the machlikas. Yesh mehem shesovrim. Da yesh oim lepalig kiim apavdila. Mishum shenim. That's the jam. Mishum shenim moichel legamrei. V'lo nikatz rosen klal. You boil strawberries or you boil cherries and you make some sort of jam. The fruit is gone. It's like a liquid, like a syrup. But according to the original din of the machaba, where you take dates and you press them, you squash them, that you can still see the original fruit, the date and things like that. They would agree that in that situation you make a ber praetz. The Yeshomrim is arguing with the din of the mechaber itself. Once you've taken the date and you've pressed it, then you would make a shahakol. There's no major nafkamina. Even if you're going to tell me that the Yeshomrim is arguing with the actual din of the mechaba, at the end of the day, we paskin like the mechaba as follows: and that's going to be the rule that emerges. So long as the mamoshan, the actual body of the original fruit is still there or visible, or recognizable, only in jam where you've boiled it and you've so distorted the original fruit, and you can't even recognize, is this raspberries, is this strawberries, is this cherry jam, it just looks like a syrup. Then you make a shahakol. Like the Ramah is saying, the Brachos yotze ala kol b'diavad. Achein le'inyan bracha achreina However, when it comes to bracha, it's not going to help you when it comes to fruit which are of the shimas haminim, tamarim, for example. If the Brachos ber nefashos rabbos eina pateres mein shalosh. If you make a ber nefashos on grapes after you finish grapes, you have not been yotza. V'lo mein shalosh pateres ber nefashos. If you make an ala peres on an apple, it won't help you either. They're mutually exclusive. Unless you had grapes and pomegranates and dates or whatever, and you had apples. You had other types of foods. And if you didn't, if you're not sure what to do, then you make me'ein shalosh. Because the ikadin of the Ramah is to make a ber pro-eitz. Okay, let me just finish the Mishnah Berurah on this, and then we'll go back and discuss some very relevant halachas. Mem Gimel, levarach shahakol. So this is going on the Ramah, who says, Tov lochosh lechatchila levarach shahakol, v'al kain, mini igris vigdis or melons. He says there, number 7, all different types of fruit, small fruit, berries and things like that. You squeeze them, and you add honey and oil and sugar. So that's like a very fine sort of jam. You would make shahakal on that. Given shem murusakim when imoichim legamrei, because they're totally pulverized and crushed. Ve'ibed mehem tzerosan, the fruit are long distant memories. But the eved in berich oisam berachos ruya yotza. But the eved, if you did make a preparation on those things, then you are yotze. Mem daled yotza. That if you make a, however, but the if you made a ber pro'etz, then you're yotza. If the majority of fruits are eaten, are crushed, then you make a ber pro'etz or ber pro'adama, whatever it is. For example, you make food out of pumpkin, shekarin, kibberis. What does he say? 8 delas, yeah, some sort of pumpkin. V'chein ingba, he says at the bottom is zangvil, which is ginger. V'shari besamim shechukim she'oichim im tzukim mevarchim ber priadoma. V'ayin lekaman siman reish ches sif ches ba'agah medinim elu. So, in other words, what is the Mechaber said? The Mechaber says you take tamarim, you take dates, and you press them and squash them. It says the Mechaber, you still make a ber pro'etz because the original Torah, the original appearance of a date is still there, and you make a ala peris at the end. Okay, now, and that seems to be the halacha. Now, the relevant halachas that come out of this are are many. Number one, what bracha do you make over latkes? You take potatoes and you grate them. Do you make a ber adama or do you make a shahakal? What about chips? What about French fries again? Or what about mashed potatoes, Pringles? What about cornflakes? It's all this halacha. So let's just, I'll flick through some of the footnotes. We'll try and do it quickly because there's some very interesting, very relevant halachas. So take a look at 43. Michael Hakari cornflakes. Yeah, can you see the second paragraph? Michael Hakari cornflakes. Yeah, so this is the cornflakes. Yeah, the cornflakes. Kasav b'shalat shuvas arlet tzion. She'emhu also megarine tiras murudodim. If it comes from crushed corn, like it says on the packet, then you would make a ber priadama. If it comes from crushed corn, because at the end of the day the corn kernels are still there, it's no different to the halacha in our case, where you take dates and you crush them and you make a ber priadama. If it comes from corn flour, like it says on the packet, so I'm going to name drop. But last week, Mordechai Willig was in school. He came to the base. So one of the privileges of teaching in the base is you have great people who come into base on a regular basis, and you have breakfast with them because they often come for shacharis. They talk after shacharis, then you have breakfast with them. So Rabbi Willig was having some frosties. And he looked at them and he says, because it depends on the country you're in. It depends on the. So I said, these are ber pradama. Yeah, it was. So I'm telling Rabbi Willig, one of the Pesach Adar, what bracha to make. Because what's the point? The Kellogg's cornflakes, they come from the way you make them. The corn granules are actually still there. The mamoshen is still there. Masha'enkein, the Israeli ones, the Telma ones, you actually make shahakal on those cornflakes. And the same thing is with Pringles. Yeah, Pringles, if you potato chips, right? Crisps we call them. If you open a packet of crisps, you make ber priadoma because you can see it's like a sliced piece of potato. So therefore you make a ber priadoma. Masha'enkein, if you take the Pringles, you're pulverizing them and crushing them, and you make a shahakal. In fact, I googled it just to check. It says, it's Wikipedia, I don't know how accurate it is, but on Pringles, 42% is actually potato. Now, what the other 58% is, I don't even want to think about, right? But that's exactly the point, right? Yeah? Okay, fine. Now, if you look, what about mashed potato? Look at 45. 45, he says here, V'chein hamerasek tapuchi adama. You take potatoes, you mash it, v'oisem mehem levivos, and you make latkes, right? Hanikras latkes. Hayra agonim shlem zaman Orach in v'sein bracha, shemevarchin aleim ber priadama. You make ber priadama on latkes. Why? Lefishi b'derech klal adayin nikel lachol sheim asuyim mitapuchi adama. Right, Chanukah time is still in the memory, and you make latkes. You can see strands of potatoes there, so you make a ber priadama on latkes. V'chein kos v'agonim el yashuv sheposhet shemevarch aleim ber priadama. V'chein inyan kigel, it's a potato kigel. Right? Also mitapuchi adama. Ha'hira agonim shlem zaman Orach sheberchos ber priadama. V'chein kos v'shal shuv shevet alevi shemakugel also mirutzos dakesh apatupuchi adama berchos ber priadama. Because you can see the strands, and therefore you make a ber priadama. What about mashed potato? Legabe pira pira is mashed potato. Ha'atum mitapuchi adama mirusokim. Das agonim nissen karelets she'mrisku b'mechtes yadoni. If you use a hand press, like a grater, sort of what I don't know what it's called. You can think of the implement. You mash it. It's called a masher, whatever it's called. Adayin tzurat hatapuchi adama nikeres mevarech ber priadama. However, imrisku legamrei. For example, use a blender and you mash a potato that is like a paste almost. Birchos shahakol, v'chein ger hagon rishlam ezam vozna, etc. So that's very important. You say it. Potato kigel, latkes, mashed potato. If the tzura, if you can still see the mamoshes, you can still see this comes from a potato. You make a ber priadama, and it's true with French fries as well. What is French fries? It's chips. You just you make chips out of them. You cut a potato, and you can see that this has a tzura of a potato. You make a ber priadama. If it's so pulverized and mashed that it's lost its original status, then you make a shahakal on it. Seder? Okay. Okay. Let's go. We've still got time to do tests. Dvash mei hatmorim. Now, dvash hazov mei hatmorim. So this is very interesting. You've got honey, which sort of just oozes out from the dates. Mevorich olov shahakol. Then you make a shahakol. V'chein al mashkin hayetzin mikol minei peiros. And so too, if any juice that just naturally emerges from any fruit, you make a shahakol on that. Chutz mizeisim v'anovim mevar shahakol. Apart from olives and grapes, where the juice you actually make a ber pro'etz. But apart from that, any other liquid that oozes out of a fruit, you make shahakal on it. So take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Hazov me'atzmarim v'uadin hayetz aladei ksisha v'schita. Even if you were to squeeze them and you would make some sort of liquid juice from them, you would make a shahakal. Mem vav alav shahakal demad zechsiv b'Torah zeis shemen udvash hainu tzmarim hayetzin mehen hadvash avol dvash gufa zeh ba'alma hu ve'ena b'chlal pri. The juice that oozes out is actually just zeh ba'alma, and therefore you make a shahakal. Al mashkin hayetzin kagoin yain tapuchin v'chiyai gavna beini istramish yotzim ele. And whether they came out by themselves, ben sheyotz aladei ksisha, whether they were pressed or schita and they were squashed, berchos and shahakol. Tezeh ba'almahu de'ein nikra mashka el hayetzim and hazeisim anovim bilvad. Because only zeisim and anovim, only grapes and olives, with the water, the liquid that comes out of them, would you make a ber pro'etz? Now the back, it's on page 57, on page 39, and footnote 47. He gives the reason. The reason why olives and grapes are called mashka and not zeh ba'alma, the Shulchan Aruch Harav says because she'ika hapri lekach notohu. When you planted olives and grapes, they're primarily planted for the juice that comes out. Es anovim lo hitzim hem yain v'zeisim lo hitzim hem shemen. Lefichach yesh lem chashivas shall pri v'chein kos v'aruch hashulchan. And therefore they've got the status of a fruit. So therefore, you make a ber pro'etz on geffen on wine or grape juice or things like that, and the ber pro'etz on olive oil, like we've discussed before. Orange juice is the big question, and generally speaking, what the poskim say is that if you see strands of orange in it, like you can buy the Tropicana with bits in it, so then you make a ber pro'etz. If, however, it's smooth and you can't see it's just a regular one or it's just smooth, then you make a shahakal. That's what emerges generally from the poskim, although it is debated. So just to summarize what we're going to say today, and we'll leave it there, that the Mechaber says in Siv Zayin that tamarim that you press and you squash and you make into some sort of mush, it's a lot. You still make a ber pro'etz on them and an ala peris at the end, and if it's totally pulverized, then you make a shahakol. And therefore, latkes, potato chips, French fries, kigel, mashed potato, if you can identify the original fruit or vegetable, you make a ber pradoma, otherwise you make a shahakol, and so too with cornflakes and things like that. It depends. If you can see the corn granules, then you make a ber pradoma, but if it's pulverized, the Pringles, etc., then you would make a shahakol. And with regard to liquid that oozes out of fruit, you make a shahakol, unless it's olives and grapes, then they have a separate bracha. Say that.
Tropicana with the bits,
ber pro'etz, yeah, because if you can see the bits, then the minhag olam is to make a ber pro'etz on that. Yeah.